Hello, and welcome to another episode of Nakoto Building Arts. I'm your host, Nakoto, and today I'd like to welcome another exciting guest to the podcast, Nate Sosin. Nate is a principal in the Chicago office of Thornton Tomasetti, an international engineering firm with expertise in structural, facade, forensic, and civil engineering, sustainable design, and bridge design and rehabilitation. Nate is a licensed structural engineer in the state of Illinois and a professional engineer in the state of California with experience in the design and construction of large and complex building structures. Some of his notable projects include the Arkansas Museum of Fine Arts in Little Rock, Arkansas, Hancher Auditorium Replacement Facility at the University of Iowa, the Mary Schmidt Campbell Center for Innovation and the Arts at Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia, currently under construction, and the redesign of Tom Lee Park in Memphis, Tennessee, which recently had its grand opening. Thornton Tomasetti's portfolio of performing and cultural arts projects are quite extensive, with projects that include the David Geffen Hall at Lincoln Center, the Knight Recital Hall at the University of Miami, Buffalo AKG Art Museum, the Capital One Hall, and the Shed in New York City. The list goes on and on. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Nate Sosin to the podcast. How are you today, Nate?
Oh, I'm great. Nakoto, thanks for having me. Always fun to talk about what we do.
Yeah, great to have you. Just bantering a little bit earlier, just playing kind of tag here to try to get you on the show. So I mean, really wanted to get you on. So I'm glad you're able to join me today.
Absolutely.
I talked to several acousticians, architects, and developers, and owners reps and managers. A lot of people involved with the whole process of cultural and performing arts, the building process of it. So I've been wanting to get on a structural engineer to get some insight from that perspective. So happy to have you join me today. So tell me, just as a structural engineer, tell me a little bit about your background and your journey into becoming a structural engineer.
Yeah, there's probably a lot of kind of cliched points. I loved playing with Legos when I was a kid.
Yes.
Loved seeing big trucks go by, things get built and come up. When it kind of coalesced, I was on the fence about architecture and structural engineering for a long time going into college, and I just gotten accepted to the University of Michigan, kind of on a pre-architecture program, and I got invited to what they call Tech Day, which was a way to introduce high school students to the engineering school, and it was on a Saturday morning at 8 in the morning. And this was about a 45-minute drive from my parents' house where I was living. And, meaning I got to get up at least 6:30 or whatever.
Yeah.
And as a teenager in high school, that prospect was less than exciting. I said, I already got in. What do I need to do this? And my dad said to me, who's an attorney, he's not an engineer or anything. He said, he just knew me well enough. He said, now you're going to go. I'm going to make you go to this thing. You're going to get up. You're going to go to Tech Day. Anyway, I toured the structures lab, the size of a big gymnasium with huge concrete walls where they test structures and crush them. They build samples, which I wound up working in later in school. And anyway, I never really looked back from that point. I switched over from architecture to engineering, and that's it. So
Yeah. So
yeah.
you grew up in what? Looking at your resume, is it Michigan area or?
I grew up just outside Detroit.
Okay.
Yeah, kind of new University of Michigan.
Hmm.
From my family, we would visit there, nice town, Ann Arbor. So, yeah, kind of was on a nice path from early on, which was, one of those things that I really value, being able
Hmm.
to, have a confidence in, all right, I'm going into buildings.
Hmm.
I know where I'm going, and obviously hit college, things get hard. You got to compete.
Yeah.
Um, but I tried a lot of things out in college. I worked for a consulting engineer. I worked in the structures laboratory. I had a really good internship with a bridge engineer. A bridge contractor.
Okay.
Got out in the field, drove a pickup truck around, did surveying, saw how buildings come together,
Mhm.
and a super valuable perspective that I still carry with me day to day. Um, but ultimately I'd heard about TT, Thornton Tomasetti in Chicago in particular. That was always kind of a goal.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked for one other firm right when I graduated out of college. Quickly made it back to Chicago to work for TT and haven't looked back. I've been here for just over 16, almost 17 years. So
Oh, awesome. Oh, wow.
yeah,
That's that's
yeah,
that's awesome. Awesome. So you moved up the ranks to become a principal in the Chicago office there.
that's right. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. It's been a journey, a lot of
Hmm.
good projects along the way, and
Yeah. Yeah.
but I will say we are a firm that prides ourselves on having people here for a long time. It's very much
Hmm.
about relationships. Our president, our CEO, these are all folks who've worked here, if not their entire career, only a couple years at another place. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. So talking about the structural engineer, when I think about the structural engineer, it's interesting because you always hear about the architects and see they have the names, and rightfully so. I mean, they have uh, the signature designs and so forth, but you rarely hear about the structural engineer. I was thinking, it's like, I only really hear about the structural engineer when something goes wrong. Like it's like if there's a bridge collapse or something happens, like, okay, who's the structural engineer for this building? So that's kind of a weird space to be in. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I, I will say, architects know structural engineers pretty well, and we get asked
Mhm.
about our competition and other folks, and so the architect knows who they want as their partner, who they want to collaborate with,
Mhm.
what are the good structural ideas out there and the innovations. And they are very aware of structural engineers, obviously much more so than the general public. Um, and so I would say to some extent, our business model is keeping that low profile, collaborating with them, helping bring whether it's the architect or the owner, developers, bring that vision to life, right?
Mhm.
And really putting the project and the designer first. And we're as engineers to a certain extent, we tend to be lower profile people, right? There's a
Mhm.
few
Right,
exceptions.
right.
I can think of a few exceptions in our profession, but generally speaking, I like to say I got into this profession to be helpful to other people.
Mhm.
And so um, I like to collaborate with people who are not structural engineers, right? I like to be the
Mhm.
structural engineer, bring that value to the table and collaborate with other people. So,
Mhm. Yeah.
um,
So with that, that relationship, I'm thinking about the relationship between the architect and the structural engineer. Um, so explain sort of the process. Do they come up with a design and they come to you and like, hey, can you actually make this a building, or like how does that work?
yeah, every firm, every partnership operates a little bit differently. I will say, my favorite clients, my best clients, and they know who they are. There's always a collaboration and there's a respect.
Mhm.
Definitely, they have the vision, right? I mean, that's why they get hired. Oftentimes, they win the job, and they have a better sense of what that they can close their eyes and visualize what's the space going to feel like, what's it going to look like. And I can do that a little bit because I've been doing this for a while, but I think that's something that engineers struggle with a little bit more. And our thought is, yeah, what's the physics, right? What's the cost? How efficient of a building? How's it going to get built? Some of my favorite conversations with architects are talking about constructability, um, because constructability, there's a saying for structural steel. Concrete's a little different, mass timber's a little bit different, but for structural steel, the rough ratio is a third of the cost is the material, a third of the cost is the fabrication, and a third of the cost is the erection, right? So if you're focusing on optimizing the material at the expense of the fabrication, then you're not really saving any money, right? So bringing that insight to the table for architects and talking about that as they're carving out space of the building massing, looking at the floor to floor heights, the ceiling sandwich, also working with the mechanical engineers, right? Because obviously, structural steel in particular, also mass timber, less so concrete because it tends to be a flatter system. There's a lot of coordination up in that sandwich to say, what are we doing in between the beams? So collaboration, communication, breaking down the technical things that we do and sharing that with other people so that they can understand, they can do their job, they can make their decisions. That's really my favorite part about it. And at the end of the day, the architect is trying to take what all of these other technical disciplines are doing and turn that into something that the general public uses, a developer, institution, a theater uses, and they're sort of bridging that gap to what everybody sees and experiences versus all of the technical systems that go into that. So, and that's what the great architects do really well.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned the different disciplines that the architects dealing with. So their team has different engineers and MEP, and one in particular I'm thinking of, the theaters and the performing arts projects that we work on. They have these acousticians where is the most important thing, so to speak, of when you're thinking of the end product. So how does your relationship with the acoustician work on many of these music facilities?
Yeah, again, it's very much collaborative, and I will say we've got some good relationships with different acousticians because just like with architects, we understand what's important to them, what's important to the acoustics of the building, and we're always kind of keeping an eye out for that in our work. I got a couple of examples. One, making for some strange bedfellows on Hancher Auditorium in particular. We were working with the acoustician there, and because of the shaping of the theater, the unique geometry, the acoustics, and the need for isolation of inside the box versus outside of the box, both the acoustician and us structurally were pushing for a concrete box out. And there were some costing exercises and, hey, can't we do, a steel frame and CMU infill? And, we looked at it, we talked about it. Ultimately, though, the architect, the structural engineer, the acoustician really felt like the building was best served with a concrete box. Now, one of the things that came out of that, thinking back to constructability, that then as the structural engineer, we had to take that design decision and pivot to the contractor to help make sure it was constructible, was they said, all right, fine, you guys want this 8,500 foot tall box, clear spans over it for the 2,200 seats we had. Let's talk about how we're going to lift. We're going to build this concrete box, and then with a separate trade come in for the structural steel and lift these heavy trusses over the top of that and set on top of it. Right. So now that's driving the crane size, which you as the cost estimator, you got a nice big line item, $7,000, $1 million for that crane in that cost estimate that now ties back to the acoustics. So again, in my situation, we're listening from everyone from the steel erector to the acoustician and making sure that these decisions find the right balance, the best balance for each project amongst all of those. And there's been other projects where we made a different decision. We went with that steel frame with the CMU infill because that was the right, solution for that theater and that market for that budget. But just understanding everybody and making sure everybody's heard, and obviously coming up with a good structural design too. That's the table stakes, as we say. Some other things, we just making sure, again, you're speaking their language, talking about floor depressions. Okay. Is this a recording studio in a building? Like you mentioned, the project at Spelman, there's a bunch of smaller rooms that are either rehearsal rooms, recording studios. What's the slab depression there look like? How does that affect our mechanical systems below because we're dropping the slab? Just keeping an eye out for those things and helping make sure there are no surprises. Some of this stuff, you just go through it 3, 4, 5, 6 times and it becomes second nature. You ask the questions up front. The project runs a little bit more smoothly.
Awesome. Thinking of the different types of performing arts buildings and theaters and so forth. I was doing a little report on what are the differences between the commercial or typical building versus a performing arts building or a museum building. I have to do that for a couple of clients, but speaking on a cost uh, issue, and what are the
Yeah.
differences? When you've worked on several types of projects, what are those differences? Can you explain and talk a little bit about the difference between a commercial building and a performing arts theater?
Yeah. I just want to pause for a second and feel for you, have a little empathy for you trying to, open folks' eyes to just the costing, the dollars per square foot, because you're trying to synthesize all that stuff, acoustic, structure, whatever, and say, hey guys,
Yeah.
these are not the same projects, right? That's a job in and of itself.
Right, 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 right.
Um, so, I would say big picture, typical office building, versus a theater, I mean, is the ownership model, right? You typically have an institution, building a theater, whether it's a university or it's just the theater company itself, who knows that they're going to be owning and living and using this building, rather than renting it out or selling it or things like that. So all of a sudden, there's a different mindset. A lot of times those institutions have a bigger focus on sustainability. I think you wanted to talk about that a little bit later.
Mhm.
So that gets baked into it. Um, but it can be very mundane things like an office building. You're going to have lightweight concrete, on metal deck. You're going to lighten up the building, go longer spans with the steel deck. Generally, for a theater, you're using normal weight concrete because it provides more of an acoustic mass that isolates, the
Mhm.
space above and the space below. So that's a pretty basic assumption, all the way up to kind of the massing and the grids of the building. Um, you're going to have these large spaces in a
Mhm.
theater with trusses that probably span over that might transfer spaces above. You're going to have the theater. You're going to have pre-function spaces that are long span. You're going to have rehearsal spaces that are long span. So trying to carve out where where these large open spaces and these long spans are within the building, not just in plan, but vertically. Ideally, we'd love to have the theater at the top of the building so that when we span over it, it's just a roof,
Mhm.
right? But if it's a multi-story building, you want the theater at the ground floor, so it's the most accessible. People come
Right,
in, the
right.
experience pre-function, you go right to your seats. And if you're trying to put space on top of the theater, maybe you're putting an office building to help pay for the theater, help finance the operations of the theater with the rentable space. Well, now you're transferring all those floors over the top of the theater. And so
Mhm.
we've done that project in downtown Chicago with Chicago Ballet. Ballet's at the bottom of the building, office and residential
Mhm.
above that. So, it can be done, but the big space, the need to carve out these big volumes within the structure,
Mhm.
really kind of drives the project and the massing
Yeah.
early on.
Yeah. Speaking of the clients and your sympathy for me, I can only tell you how many times I had clients to say, "Hey, our school building down here was only so and so dollars a square foot. Why is this building cost?" So
Yeah,
try
twice
to
that. Yeah,
break,
yep, yep,
yeah, break down the different reasons why this building is more expensive. So yeah,
yeah,
thanks for sharing that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
You mentioned the sustainable design, and we're starting to see that more, obviously, with the carbon emissions and so forth, and the sustainable, even moving more to sustainable design principles. Um, what are some of the ways, I guess, what are some of the ways, are we starting to see that more on the performing arts and the cultural arts projects? Do you have any experience, say, with mass timber structure? And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm very lucky to be sitting in the Chicago office of Thornton Tomasetti, where we're definitely have some of the leading mass timber projects throughout the firm. The Portland office, the New York office also have some great examples, but our Chicago and Milwaukee offices did the Ascent Tower in Milwaukee, tallest timber tower in the world. So we're definitely uh, as much as anyone out there. I always hate to use the superlatives, but we're doing a lot of interesting things with mass timber.
Mhm.
And certainly, like I said, those institutional clients that are building theaters, oftentimes they are the clients who are the most interested and passionate about sustainability. So
Mhm.
we do have conversations about mass timber on a lot of these projects. Um, a couple of things about mass timber. It's tough to get it to do longer spans.
Yeah.
It is even for the shorter spans of building like Spellman, where you've got these smaller acoustically sensitive spaces, mass timber does have challenges with acoustics and vibration, requires a
Mhm.
little bit more mitigation relative to a concrete structure. Um, Also, when you've got a performing arts space, you tend to have assembly occupancy, which is going to have the highest demands for fire performance. Now that's changing a little bit with the current codes, but that is a consideration versus a residential building. Um, there are still opportunities for mass timber in these projects, certainly in the pre-function spaces, office spaces, things like that. Working on a project right now that has a 500 seat auditorium. So you've got your assembly space, but they do have some smaller classroom and offices in there as well. So we're looking to do kind of a concrete for acoustics around the auditorium for the longer
Mhm.
spans, some PT girders over the roof for longer spans, and then mass timber basically outside of that fire rated,
Mhm. Mhm.
acoustically isolated box. Um, so yeah, it's present. One of the challenges, and I've had this conversation quite a bit, just had it a couple days ago, for folks in your profession, is that mass timber is a little bit kind of like Wild West right now in terms of, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Tell me about it.
In terms of project delivery, uh,
Mhm.
the way that the system is designed, the actual system that you're using, the connectors that you're using. Are you doing delegated design for the connections, or is the design team doing it? Um, how well has the design team respected the module of mass timber,
Mhm.
CLT panels, and all of which can take the cost from pretty much affordable, and we've seen actually cost competitive with concrete
Mhm.
on very disciplined projects to, significantly more money, right?
Right.
And you're trying to make these decisions early in a project, and it takes a very small detail to drive the cost up way up. And depending on what manufacturer you talk to, they're going to give you different numbers. They're going to have a different experience. So there's just this huge variability, and we don't have, like, I like to use the connectors as an example for mass timber, because you've got 10 different manufacturers. They've all got different screw diameters, screw lengths, screw head types, different coatings, interior versus exterior. Structural steel, I've got A325 bolts and A490 bolts, and I know the diameters they come in, and
Right.
I know what lengths they come in, and it's very easy to design a connection. So mass timber is just really all over the place. Very hard to get price certainty early on in a project and make good decisions. We're pretty good at it because we've tried really hard on a lot of projects and got burned, and we said, okay, the next one we're going to do this, this, and this right off the start. It's going to price out, and so we're getting more success with that. Performing arts is a tougher nut to
Yeah.
crack because of those other reasons I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I definitely agree. And I would concur with the Wild Wild West. It's hard to wrangle down to a cost on it. So I've got my bumps and bruises and in that experience, unfortunately and fortunately.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So next question is, so can you talk to me a little bit about some of the projects that you worked on and share some of your experience with those? I don't know if you have photos or pictures or anything.
I don't have photos I
Okay.
was able to pull up, unfortunately. You
Well, can I
mentioned,
ask?
yeah, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, yeah.
No, I was going to ask you about one of the. I know I looked on your um, website and it mentioned the one that just opened in Memphis, Tennessee, and that was a pretty unique project. The Tom Lee Park. Um, I'll share a photo of it when I edit this. But yeah, that was a nice one too.
Yeah, no, I can I'll send you some photos to add in post, if you will. Yeah, no.
Yeah, it's nice.
Tom Lee Park was a great one, collaboration with Studio Gang. Really great
Hmm.
partner of ours in Chicago. We love working with them. That was one that has been in our office, or was in our office for a long time. Kind of came to me right in the connection detailing phase, I'll say, in construction, and my
Hmm.
team. And yeah, learned a lot of great things, had a really good collaboration with Timber Lab, the timber supplier.
Hmm.
Um, that was one where I think they were gearing up to design all the connections themselves, right?
Okay.
And they didn't really know that TT doesn't operate. I mean, we operate like that sometimes, but when we're doing something new, when we've got a good relationship, when we know that client like Studio Gang is relying on us to make sure their vision gets executed as agreed, we weren't going to pass the connection design off to anyone.
Yeah.
So we did that, and Timberlab was happy to let us do it. And they were also there like offering advice, hey, if we do it this way, this is how our CNC machine operates. Can I cut out a little bit more material because the radius of my chainsaw, the CNC chainsaw works like this? And that was just a really, really great experience. It's those projects that I feel like I don't have enough of in my career where
Yeah.
everybody comes together. No one's complaining about schedule and money because you're all just, driving forward, and
Right.
you're hitting all your targets, but you're still working through some tough situations. So, yeah, that was a really good one.
That's good. Yeah.
And actually, not to correct you, but it did open about this time last year, uh,
Okay.
which is timely because it's an exposed timber structure. We're actually doing some ongoing observations of that, making sure that the exterior timber is performing and aging as intended. So we're doing a visit down there coming up. So that's another kind of consideration to help the parks, Memphis River Parks Partnership, make sure that this investment in the community that they've made lasts for a long time. So that's another thing that's coming.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So as a structural engineer, what are some of the most challenging things about being a structural engineer?
Yeah, where to start on that?
And to follow up, what are some of the most challenging projects that you worked on?
Yeah. I would say communication. And I think it goes a lot of different ways. It goes, in the early part of your career, it's communicating externally with those people who have those other technicians, the architects, the designers who have that completely different perspective than you do. They have a completely different set of responsibilities than you do. You're trying to learn your job the first, 2-3 years in your career, and communicate it to other people. And I think that's a huge challenge, right? And it's one that I worked really hard on, and I had some, like you said, bumps and bruises along the way, things I probably wouldn't do again if I could do it all over.
Yeah.
But also some really great connections with partners. Like the more you communicate, you build that trust. You find the people who put up with you and who appreciate you, and you learn them, and you're like, I got to make this person happy. I got to make this project successful. You really build those relationships. So I think the communication is the best part. It also, the flip side, now a little bit later in my career, communication with my team, right? And not to sound like an old man, but like kids these days, there's different priorities, right? Generations have different perspectives, priorities, approaches. And at the end of the day, I think everyone who's here at TT wants to do great projects, wants to do great engineering. So tapping into that and kind of focusing on that with the team and finding out what motivates individuals, I think is a challenge, because I'm out there, I'm trying to tell everybody how great TT is and why we should be on your project. And I'm trying to make sure the project's successful. And, really it's all of the folks that are working with me who are actually doing that, right? And so we have a hard job. We have a lot of work to do. We have to, do it as well as anybody else in the industry. And so motivating the team and communicating the priorities of the project to them is a challenge as well. In terms of challenging projects, I'd like to think that they're all behind me. No, but it's I would say that the challenging projects are the ones where you don't have that trust and you don't have the relationship with people.
Okay.
To me, I think of them. There are some challenges out there related to, okay, we got to do this crazy project in X amount of time with X amount of dollars, and well, we need twice as much time and 4 times as much dollars to do it.
Right.
And those, again, you go back to communication, like, this is what we can do. This is what we've got. Let's all make choices as a team. It's really more so with the partners. When you feel like there's a partner that's not giving as much to the success of the project as you are, those are the tough ones.
Okay.
Um, this is this is a business. Everyone's in this to make money. You are, we are, contractors are, architects are. Um, but I feel like, at the end of the day, you got to look at the big picture. Like, okay, we might make a little more money on this project, a little less money on this project, but
Mm,
it's really about communication and relationships. And can we stay satisfied,
mhm.
preserve those relationships, get the next one, and are we making money on average? Because some projects are just going to be trickier than others.
Yeah, yeah. I, I've seen some architects, especially in this line of work in the arts world, the back of the napkins, drawings. Um, are there ever any instances where they present you with something and you're like, I don't know if this is even possible to do, structurally.
Every
Is it
day, every
okay?
day. That's what, like I said, that's our business model, right? And
Okay.
and again, I'm very lucky to a lot of the architects, a lot of the clients I work for are very respectful. And that back of
Mhm,
the envelope or that rendering or that Rhino model, that's their opening bid, right? They're like, this is the vision.
mhm,
What can we do? And I'm trying to think of some examples. I could talk in generalities all day, but um, uh, I've got a project right now in the very early stages where there's, two intersecting volumes and they don't quite line up. And the one on the top has to cantilever out, and the one on the bottom, they don't want columns from the upper one coming down.
mhm,
So the question is, okay, can we have some columns come down, but we pull them away from the edge? So you get the feeling of the cantilevered volume. That's sort of the half step.
mhm,
Um, if you really want zero columns, can we put a truss somewhere in that upper volume to either cantilever out or to hang the building up?
mhm,
Which of the floors up in the upper volume could handle the diagonals of that truss cutting through the space, right? Is there a mechanical floor we can do? Is there a room? Maybe it's a performing arts space, so there's a room that wants to be acoustically cut off from the outside. So we
mhm,
could do truss diagonals sort of bounding that box. So to me, it's all about coming back with options,
mhm,
saying, I see your vision, I see what you're going for. And sometimes it's questions. It's like, well, what's the most important part of this vision? So we can find the solution, the structural solution that preserves the most of that within the project realities. But the opening bid, the opening bid is almost always just outside the realm of what the project can tolerate, right? It's
yeah.
always just it's like just out there, and we say, okay, you know, this project wants us to move just a little bit this way. How do we do that without giving up the? And sorry, not to belabor the point, there are times where we say that concept, we can't get there. We can't find a way to that solution. And my clients, my partners will say, all right, we're going to study this. We're going to go back. And then a week later, they come back with something completely different because we just couldn't preserve enough of the idea within the project constraints to
Mhm,
to make it happen. So they go
mhm.
back to the drawing board. We start again.
Have you ever looked at a project that wasn't your project, wasn't a TT project, but you saw it and it's like, wow, that's pretty amazing what they're able to come up with.
Um, every day, right? So, that's the nice thing. If you give the same thing to 10 engineers, they will come up with 10 different solutions. And so
Mm,
you store that. A lot of times they'll say, well, I wonder if they thought about this. I wonder if they thought about that. Um, I just had a conversation with someone about a building. I don't want to name any names here. A building that I saw go up when I was in college, and it was an art museum. And I don't think this will give it away, but there's a big concrete wall came up and then cantilevered way over, right? So it's
mm,
sort of like a lowercase r, went up and way over. And I'm in college studying structural engineering. I'm like, that's awesome. That's so cool.
mm,
And what I just had a conversation with someone that the corner of that R, the cantilever, uh, they, about 5 years after that facility opened, they had facade issues, and
Mm,
they had been repairing that facade ever since, every couple of years. And so they're kind of like, well, did they think about the settlement, right? Or the long-term creep and shrinkage of the concrete, and that element wanting to lean over the years, and what that does to the facade jointing at the corner. And that's a big challenge in our job, is to, the unknown unknowns,
mm,
right? Say, okay, I know I can get the physics of this. In the perfect world, I can sketch it. I can put enough rebar in there. The concrete's the right thickness. I can maybe even put the right foundations in there. But have I asked the geotech how those foundations are going to settle differentially over the
mm,
years? What that means to that deflection, and what that means to the facade. So always kind of stress testing.
mm.
We have a TT, a QA/QC program that, gets senior leaders on other senior leaders projects to kind of like stress test it and kind of push it a
Mhm.
little bit. And that's an important part of what we do.
Awesome, awesome. Well, tell me something. How you thinking of the complexity of these projects, and with the advancement of technology and artificial intelligence, and how does that affect your profession of the structural engineer? Is it augmenting? Is it replacing? Or what's happening with that?
Yeah, great question. A lot of really smart people asking and attempting to answer that question right now. Rob Otani, who's our chief technology officer at Thornton Tomasetti, spending a lot of time thinking about that. We have a lot of in-house tools that we develop.
Mm,
Um, I personally, the clients that I work with, and the project types that I work on, are the number of constraints and is so high, and the number of previously comparable projects is so low. It's hard to think, it's hard to picture machine learning or AI having a data set that they could then apply to these projects. I say that, I am certain in about 2, 3, 5, 10 years, I will be proven wrong and someone will show me. Um, I think about challenges with AI, the tendency to hallucinate, right? And especially as the questions or the prompts become more complex, the
mm,
tendency for the AI to hallucinate and sound like it's coming up with an answer, but not really having it.
mm.
And I try to reconcile that with structural engineering, where we cannot say something that we are unsure of, right? That the
Okay.
consequences are too high.
Yeah.
Um, Life safety, of course, but also project schedule, project budget, right? If we say something and we go down a path that's not right, and then all of a sudden we have to do a 180, it's hugely consequential. So I think that is going to be a challenge for AI. Um, I could think of a bunch of little ways that it can help us. We have a lot of tools for component design, whether it's composite beam or even truss design, where we've had computers for different loading types, different occupancies, different spans, different depth ratios, even different materials. We've had to iterate through, thousands and thousands of designs,
Mm,
and we can query those databases for, a quick answer in a meeting, right? So
right.
it's really more of that utility belt that I
Mhm,
wear as an engineer, that it helps me, rather than a replacement
mhm.
for my engineering judgment, right? You can't,
Right.
if heaven forbid, if a structural engineer of record is criminally negligent, you can hold them responsible. You can't hold a
Mm.
computer responsible, So that, operating with that as your background, your backstop, really, I think, kind of puts it in perspective.
I guess you'll always need that human element to, even if AI gets stronger and stronger and more information as they start feeding it, you probably still need that human curator or something to guide it to go in the
I,
direction that you want it to go, I believe.
I think that'll be true for a long time. I'm not, like I said, I don't want to say always, because
Yeah,
again,
well, not all, yeah,
probably about
yeah.
18 months before we're proven wrong or whatever. But, uh, you know, um, design of components, design maybe of wall systems, and,
Mhm,
thermal envelopes and buildups, optimization of prefabricated modules for housing, things like that. There's a
mhm,
huge domain where I think AI in the building industry can be super, super helpful. I think I think it all comes down to it provides professionals with tools to use to do our job rather than replacing us as professionals.
That makes
Yeah.
sense. Okay, just this is one or two more questions. As a structural engineer, thanks for giving this advice here. A lot of insight into what you do. Um, what advice can you give someone that may want to become a structural engineer? You told about a little bit about your upbringing and guidance. What advice would you? Because I speak to a lot of young people sometimes on career and trajectory and where they want to go in career. What would be your advice?
Yeah. You want the unvarnished view? You want the
Or get ready for 10 years of school or what? I
yeah.
don't
Well, no, I mean you
know.
can the master's degree is kind of our you know table stakes as we say. So that's usually about 5 years, maybe six, depending on how much you want to take on in any given year. So it's fairly modest relative to other professions. Um, I would say you've got to be passionate about it. It is not a 9 to 5 job, right? Uh, I find, especially at this point in my career, I spend 6 hours a day listening to other people and trying to figure out what they need. And I spend 2 to 6 hours a day actually producing engineering work, depending on what other team members I have available, how hard they're working, what skill set they have, what skill set I have. So it's that balance of you're doing something very technical that for me, sometimes I just need to be alone at night in my office after my kids go to bed.
Mhm.
Really, no one's calling me, no emails are coming in, and really solve a technical problem, which I love, and I hope I never give that up. But that technical problem is only there. It only exists because I'm out trying to help a project team. I'm trying to help my team work through something, what have you. So you got to be passionate about it because you're never going to get the time to do this job in a 9 to 5, right?
Mhm.
It just doesn't work like
Right.
that. Um, and I will say the money comes and goes. It's for how hard you work, and I think this is probably changing a little bit since when I was starting out. Because I started out before the financial crash. But I always felt like, okay, how hard am I working versus the money I make versus other people? And that can be a tough pill to swallow at some point, which is why you always say, like, I looked at other careers, right?
Mhm.
At probably 5 years, 10 years, 15 years in my career. At each time I took a pause and I said, what else could I be doing right now? How much money would I be making and how happy would I be? And I'm still here. When you balance all three of those things, so you got to be passionate about it. It's super cool. It's fun to talk to with other people. Everybody has nobody really knows what we do, but they have an inherent respect for
Mhm.
what we do, which is cool. And at the end of the day, you're putting things together. You're solving problems that only structural engineers can help solve. So
Right, right. You mentioned a team. How many people on a team, say for one particular project, so like your Spellman project or
yeah,
so?
okay. So Spellman, I would say that's kind of like that's like right in the middle of what we do.
Mhm.
And structural engineering, we had at its peak when we were really cranking, I would say we had 4 structural engineers,
Okay.
right? Uh, but that's for like a 2 or 3 month period where we're producing construction documents. I would say, during CA, there's a project manager, project engineer. As a principal, I'm involved intermittently, just checking in, keeping an eye on things, coming in if there's conflict and things like that. Um, but that's a team for one project. Now we do often, most of our engineers, except if we're doing like an airport project or something, most of our engineers are on multiple projects.
Okay.
Um, and that's just to give a breadth of experience. Projects start and stop, they go on pause, so just making sure everybody's busy, nobody's twiddling their thumbs.
Mhm.
And again, giving engineers a breadth of experience. Maybe one project's concrete, one project steel.
Mhm.
Just trying to make sure that nobody gets pigeonholed into like I'm just the steel
Right,
beam.
right. That's
Yeah.
easy to do. Yeah. Mhm.
Um, the other nice thing about TT is every project I'm on here, I lead, has one other discipline on it, generally facade engineering. We provided facade engineering on Spelman. We do work for the federal government where we do blast engineering and protective design.
Oh,
We do construction engineering on especially on stadiums, but other unique pedestrian bridges, things like that, where the constructability is not just important, but it's fundamental to the success of the project. Um, and we have, again, sustainability. We have a host
mhm.
of, you mentioned them at the outset, but
Mhm.
so those people are on our team, my team, whether I'm leading them or whether we're all doing it together. Sometimes protective design will lead a project and structures kind of supports them. Uh, it, there's not really a hierarchy, right? It's sort of
Mhm.
like, okay, who is responsible for what, right? Am I
Right.
responsible for keeping the client happy? I have to do that. If that's easy some days and hard some days, that's my job. Someone else has to, design the building, run the analysis model, work through the easy parts of that, the hard parts of that. So it's really about ownership and responsibilities and less about like hierarchy. So
Awesome, awesome. You mentioned the blast. I was thinking of presidential libraries. Like I know we're
yeah.
doing the Obama library, I think, right?
Yes.
Too. Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
So
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And
yeah,
that's a so just to nerd out here for a second, that is a presidential center.
presidential.
And
Okay.
and the difference being in the context of your point was libraries are run by the National Archives
Okay.
and have very specific blast criteria. Presidential centers can take those very specific blast criteria and pick and choose which ones they think are important to
Mm.
the mission. So it gives them a little bit more independence from the federal government. So
Gotcha.
uh, I don't know how we're on time here, but I will say that is sort of fun is when we say, okay, we don't have a prescriptive requirement of what to do. We don't have to design for X, Y, and Z blast, but we
Mm.
know other projects would do X, Y, and Z. Do we maybe want to do a little bit more for this? Let's explain the trade-offs to the client and the team. Maybe we want to do a little less in some spots. Those are the
Mm.
conversations that I love where we can share not just the
Mm.
technical parts, but the implications for everybody else of what we do and help them make a decision.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Well, my last question is, so what's next for you, as far as you hiring more staff, you speaking engagements or conferences or?
Um, Yeah, well, we're personally, I'm grew up in the Detroit area. We the Chicago office in particular, me and another principal here have been making a concerted effort to get a little bit more work and make a bigger contribution to our hometown. We're starting to see that gain some traction. We've got some projects there. Of course, TT as a whole has a great history in Detroit. We did the Ford Field a long time ago. We did a project called Lift Build, which is, I don't know if you heard about that, but that's where you form and pour structural slabs on the ground. First, you place the concrete cores, the structural
Mhm.
slabs on the ground, you lift them up to the top, and you basically build the building from top down. So we did a project. Our DC office actually did a project in Detroit called the Exchange. It's
Mm.
got a lot of press. Very cool
Yeah.
project. Um, so yeah, trying to get more work there, stay connected with my hometown. The federal work, is big for us and trying to expand that market and always looking for the performing arts center too, looking for that next
Yeah,
one.
yeah, that was a nice one.
Yeah.
Any plans to build on on the moon? I was thinking of those earlier.
Uh,
I've heard discussions about that. Are you all involved with that or any
oh
way?
man, I'm
Okay.
sure I know we did a 3D printed Mars habitation. I know we did a project for that.
Okay.
Um, but I don't get involved with a lot of those. I'm
Okay.
working on a proposal for to install a new autonomous vehicle transit system right now. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, the team is a very interesting team. We're going up against a more traditional solution, so that's really exciting. We'll see where that goes. I'm trying not to get my hopes up, but that could be a really cool project.
Yeah,
So
that would, yeah,
yeah,
definitely. Yeah, keep me posted on that one. That'd be nice.
we'll do.
Final question is, how can our viewers get in contact with you? What's the best way? And I can put it down at the bottom.
Oh, yeah,
Great.
sure. I'll give you my email and flash that on. It's people are going to need to see it because Thornton Tomasetti is a mouthful to write in the email. Uh,
Okay.
and then LinkedIn is always great.
Yeah.
I feel
All right.
like LinkedIn is a great place to start a conversation. You can pick it up from there. You can go to
Awesome.
email,
Awesome.
cell, or in person from LinkedIn if you want.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate this time. It's been enjoyable for me. Glad I was able to connect with you, and hopefully a lot of people learn some things. And we need to get in contact with Nate. I'll put his information down for you to write down at the bottom there. Appreciate it, Nate, and have a great day. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you, Nakoto. Thanks for the invitation.